Welcome, everyone. Here we are again at the Beyond the Veil Summit. I want to thank you for joining us. And today our special speaker is Paul Aran. And I want to introduce you to Paul. He's actually a personal friend and colleague. And Paul is one of the most experienced and respected past life and between life regression therapists. He is also a researcher conducting leading edge research right now with sudden cardiac arrest patients and kind of researching whether they have an NDE during their brush with death. And Paul is actually a near-death experiencer himself. And so we're glad to have you, Paul. Welcome to the Beyond the Veil Summit.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really nice to see you and be here with you.
Thank you, Paul. So I think the best way to do this is to dive right into your first near-death experience where you were struck by lightning.
That was my enlightening experience. About 20 years ago, standing in the street on a sunny day, packing up the car from a swim meet, all hell broke loose. Huge, loud, unbelievable explosion. I didn't know what caused it. Everything went white. And suddenly I began to be electrocuted. And as often people talk about when they have an NDE, it seemed like time just went slow motion. And as my body stood rigid, convulsing, actually bouncing in the street, I wondered where the electricity was coming from. It was electrocuting me. I had enough time to think, well, I'm wearing rubber sandals. That should be able to insulate me, but doesn't seem to be working, right? And then it ended. My body continued to convulse. People in the distance saw me fly like a missile, land on my head. And I don't know how much time I lost, 10, 15 minutes. When I regained consciousness, I was in water about 2 feet deep in the middle of a huge storm, hail, rain, wind. It took 45 minutes for the ambulance to get there because the roads were so bad. They got me to the hospital and didn't really know what to do with me because I'd survived. They ran some tests and after a few hours released me. And the next day I woke up feeling like I'd been run over by a fleet of dump trucks, is the best way I could explain it. I knew something profound had happened. I didn't know what it was. And I had problems with memory loss and some other physical problems from it. Couldn't practice for many months. And then finally was regressed by a colleague in order to release the trauma, is what I expected. And it really did help to release the trauma that was lodged in my body because I fought with all my being to resist that. And I knew that if it continued, I would die, which apparently I did for a short time anyway. And so he regressed me back to that time to release the trauma from my body. And that's when I really recovered the memories of leaving body, of what I call going home. And I had read some about NDEs, but didn't really stand out to me or have any great significance to me. But looking back, I had very similar experience to what many people describe. One of the most profound things for me was, of course, to realize that I was still conscious, even though my body wasn't functioning. I still had awareness, even though I wasn't in my body. And as Eben Alexander says, I wasn't limited by my mental mind. I had much more greatly expanded consciousness. And in that rather brief time that I was out of body, I received some messages that were significant for me. The biggest one really was listen. They sort of said to me, not that I saw people or beings, many people do, but the message was, you have a pretty good mind, but you depend on it too much. You need to learn to listen. Listen to your heart, listen to your soul, and listen to spirit. We will guide you. They said, you're on the right path, you're doing the right work, but you need to do it in a different way with a different intention or consciousness, by listening and by going more from soul. And in addition to that, while I was there, I experience the kind of oneness that people talk about that you can read in a meditation book. And I think for me, one of the profound things about this was these kinds of things like life after death, having a soul, survival of consciousness were concepts and theories that on some level I believed, but now I really experienced it. It's not a thought or a belief or a religious belief. It's a knowing from my own experience. So I experienced this oneness being part of all things that is really hard to describe because I had a sense of self, but there was no sense of separation in any way whatsoever. I felt not just a part of all things, but that I was all things all at the same time. And then I had a profound experience of deep gratitude and appreciation that came from those people whose lives I touched by doing the kind of work that I was doing. And it's really nice to get paid after you do a session, but this was something beyond that. To just feel that love and appreciation from people whose lives I touched that. And I came back with that. I came back with an experience of unconditional love. I came back with knowing that you survive your body. I'm not afraid of death. I mean, how many people can say that? You know, the dying part, no, getting hit by lightning, that was really painful. But being free from the body, that's the most beautiful experience I've ever had. So after that, and after I began to recover after that regression, knowing I'd had this experience, I really began to wonder, how can I develop a technique or an approach or a session for someone so that they could have those same kind of profound transformational experiences without the trauma, without the getting killed part or the dying part. And I wasn't sure how to do it. And well, a couple of things happened that really helped me find my way. And one was I was doing a live demonstration of a past life regression at a pretty good sized conference in Sydney, Australia. So I have a couple of hundred people in the audience and a volunteer that comes up that I am intending to take into childhood and then in utero and then into past life. And as I attempt to take him to his first pleasant or enjoyable childhood memory, he starts describing something I can't fully understand because it sure didn't seem like childhood. And it became obvious pretty quickly that he was on the ceiling of the operating room while the heart surgeon was working frantically to get his heart started. He'd had bypass surgery earlier that day and was doing okay, but then his heart stopped after the surgery. And he didn't know this had happened. I mean, he knew he had the heart surgery 4 years prior, but it was during the regression, he said, well, they're working really hard. That doctor's really breaking a sweat, but I don't think they're gonna succeed. I don't think this is gonna work. They're not gonna get me back. And then he describes, I was amazed. I'm thinking past life, this is a very different story than I expected, right? I didn't know you could regress someone back to this sort of thing until I had my own experience. And he drifted down the hall from the operating room into the waiting room where his wife is waiting. And they're telling her, we're not sure, we're trying to resuscitate him. His heart's stopped and we don't know if he's going to come back. He described that conversation. He described the room that he's never been in, including the furniture and this terrible carpet that they had in. He checked with his wife that night after the conference, and she said, absolutely, that's exactly how the room was decorated, and that was the furniture in there. And he described her thoughts. They had 9 or 10 children. And once she was informed, she was kind of going down the list, life insurance, tell this child, this one will tell that one, her whole checklist. And he could rattle that off to her from the regression. And she was amazed, like, how did you know? How do you know, right? So this was some evidence for me, beyond my own experience, that there must be some way to explore this more. right? So, but I still wasn't sure. And it wasn't until 2001 where I saw Michael Newton doing his first course and live life between life regression demonstration. Right, so he had a class of about 50 some people, and he had a woman up front, and he was regressing her back through childhood, womb, past life, and a place that those of us who were doing past life regression had never really been able to find or explore. He managed to move people from the death scene in their past life into spirit, right? Much like people that have NDE's experience. And hearing her describe her experience being so similar to what you hear people with NDEs describe, this really got my attention. And so I completed that training, and I went on and have been practicing that ever since. That's been my main focus in my work, is to regress people in general to childhood, but also in utero, because, William, this is such a fascinating time. Who remembers what happens in there, right? We have no conscious memory of it. But think of what's happening. The soul is coming from that place where it's lived with loved ones and wise beings and guides, and it's beginning the process of incarnation into this new body that's developing and preparing to come. If you get someone in utero, you can begin to not talk to the ego or the mental mind, but you can begin to talk to the soul. How are you feeling about coming to be born? And what is it you're coming this time to do and to learn and work on? Why this family? Why this body, this gender? It's really a very fascinating place to explore. And I think it's a hard place to get to doing more traditional talk therapy. You know, you do it. Isn't it hard to go before when someone's pre-verbal?
Oh yeah, Paul, you're absolutely right. As a psychotherapist, with the tools that I have been trained in, we are very limited in how we can get, access these, pre-verbal memories, let alone in utero. And I agree with you. I too am a past life regression therapist. Not near at the level you are, Paul, with your level of training and many decades of practice. But one of the questions I have, if I may, is you've had your NDE, you've worked with, hundreds and hundreds of people, regressing them into that space between lives. What are the similarities and differences for, what we can expect for what's beyond the veil for all of us? Is there some set of features, qualities, characteristics, what have you?
There are many. I think the biggest difference is that it's not induced by trauma or near death, and it's not enhanced with drugs. It's a natural opening. It's a more gentle experience. Sometimes mental mind gets in the way, and that's one of our challenges. So we really have to work with that. But I think, one of the big ahas is individual realizing that I have consciousness even though I'm not currently in this body, to allow consciousness to expand beyond the limits of the mental mind. Some meditators can achieve this, right? But this is guided, so it takes us further. We're directing the person to go back in time. Reconnecting with something that is us, beyond our human body, beyond our humanness, beyond our earthliness, reconnecting with our soul, our divine spiritual being that inhabits this body, and starting to not just imagine ourselves as being something more than our body, but to begin to experience ourselves as that spiritual being with a higher perspective, with a more objective perspective that goes beyond the ego. I think being able to live and guide our lives from this higher place, not that we don't need our mental mind, we do to function on this planet, but you get your spiritual inspiration, direction, remember what you're here for, And then you can use your body and your mental mind to implement that, to do that. I think one of the other things is communication, that we use our technology to communicate. You and I are in different places and we're using our technology to do that. But in spirit, there's no time and there's no distance. And we're able to, in spirit, communicate with loved ones who have passed, who've gone back to the spirit world, but we can just as easily communicate with the unincarnated part of someone's soul, even when they're alive on planet Earth. And it's free, William, it's free of all the nonsense that exists and goes on this planet Earth. It's clear what's truth, it's clear what's loving and what's not. Yeah, so you're free of a lot of that nonsense. It's rough coming back to it, I'll tell you that, and then trying to live with it.
Yes.
And I think one of the other biggest things is there's no judgment. I think we learn from a very young age that if you do this, you'll be punished, you'll be judged. And who's going to judge you? Some religious being, not just your parent, right? There's going to be some form of price to pay, some punishment. And I've yet to see it in the thousands of regressions I've done. I see self-punishment, but I don't see any divine being. I don't see any religious being. I don't see any loved one or guide punishing someone. Sometimes they can be a little stern, but that's about as far as I've seen it go. And often when they're stern, they're just kind of role-playing, kind of mocking or making fun. They're actually hilarious in spirit, right? But there's no judgment. It's about learning and it's about growth, right? And if you know that from your own experience, you live very, very differently.
I really appreciate the way you're grounding us right into the deep teachings that your work reveals with these regressions. It also reminds me, as you know, as a shared death experience researcher, the terrain, if you will, looks, feels the same as both the NDE and, in addition, the landscape that is described and found now in the research on the between life regressions. I find that quite compelling and affirming for all of us who are going to die, because it seems like it points to a common shared destination that we have. Does that ring true for you? Do you think we're all headed to a similar place, and that your research and your experiences suggest that?
So I would say yes, there is a common destination, although the individual can experience it in a very individual way, especially at the initial stages. In other words, when I arrived myself, I saw this sort of pastoral scene, right? That's very typical of people's descriptions. And I sort of said, like, oh, this is like something from Hollywood. How can this be? We just need Meryl Streep here to make it all perfect, right? And then a guide from me, a personal guide, appeared and acted rather silly. I expected him to be all serious and maybe even judge me. But he was really funny, and he sort of waved his arm and the entire scene changed from this beautiful pastoral scene to a desert. And I was a little confused, and he looked at me and said, well, but you like the desert, don't you? And I do. It opens my heart. I love it, right? And he said, this can look any way you need it to look. It's for your own comfort. You've just arrived, and this is something that's familiar to you, right? And so on that sense, it may be different than what you experience when you go, because it was especially for me. But yeah, there in spirit, I mean, it's vast. It's universes, right? It's not something that can be contained in any way, but it is certainly not nothing. It is not the end when this body dies. It's just the beginning. And so, yes, there's a place where other souls meet, especially ones that you're close with. There are places where we learn. There are places where we do things. Michael Newton was brilliant in mapping that, but it's a vast universe. I think that there's still a lot of work to do, and I'm glad to be participating and doing some of it.
Wow, beautiful. Maybe this is a good time to for you to tell us about your research that you're doing now with sudden cardiac arrest patients, and in relationship to, you know, you regress them and see if they've had an ND and what have you. Could you tell us about that?
I'd love to. There was a cardiologist, or is a cardiologist, up in northeastern Canada that trained in some of the techniques I teach and was really interested in this work. And he approached me about a pilot study, and he gathered 20 of his sudden cardiac arrest patients together for me to regress back to those last moments before their heart stopped. And these were mostly minors from that area. And so I got my hands on 20 of these people that had all been clinically dead. Some of them had some inkling that something had happened, that they'd seen or experienced something, but no details really. So there weren't a lot of preconceptions, right? And as I regressed them, we saw so many similarities. Many of them described hovering above the scene as the paramedics or the EMTs worked on them to try to resuscitate them. They could describe in great detail the actual procedure that was done on their body. They would describe being taken away on the gurney and put in the ambulance and taken to the hospital. But all of this was from this higher perspective, where they could describe being able to float or move or even follow the ambulance. Many of them also talked about going to, I think we would call it the threshold. They all had some awareness of reaching some point of no return, right? So some of them said, no, if I, and it wasn't necessarily like a doorway, but there was a moment in time where they realized, if I keep going, I'm never coming back. And it was around this place where most of them, I would say, were met by a uncle or a grandmother or a parent or someone who'd passed away some years prior, that came and greeted them and said, it's not your time. It's not your time. You must go back. You must go back. And then they would return and come back into their body. There were a couple of exceptions. I had one of the most fascinating cases I thought was, this guy was watching television with his wife, and between the two of them realized he was probably having a heart attack. He got in his truck and he drove to a lodge that was about 5 miles from their house, because he knew they had a defibrillator there. And if his heart stopped, they could resuscitate him. He went in, he knew the guy who ran the lodge, and he thought, the owner of the lodge thought he was joking around until he collapsed on the floor because his heart quit. So they got the defibrillator and they went to defibrillate him, but before they could, he's describing watching them run for it, trying to figure out how to use this thing while his body's flat on the floor. And then he's in this beautiful field, hard to describe, but bring tears to your eyes if you heard him describe it. And his favorite dog that he had missed so much, that had died years before, comes bounding towards him and is licking him, welcoming him. And then bzzz, back in his body, right? They resuscitate him, he's back in his body. He's like, I was good to go. Why did you do that? Then actually his heart stopped again. He went back, more continued with the dog, and then they shocked him again and resuscitated him. And that was the end of that journey. And he, like some, still, when I worked with him, longed for that freedom that he experienced there out of body, right? That's one of the reasons it can cause depression for someone when they have an NDE, is they experience this unconditional love, this expanded state, and then come back to some of the challenges in their daily life.
Yes, that reality is one that's pretty well understood for those of us who work with near-death experiencers and shared-death experiencers. The coming back, as we know, into this, I think the land where we have a human life and a personality and an ego to contend with, far more difficult than that space that you're sharing with us here today. Those who access that NDE space, I think it's beyond the veil.
It is. The other person that stands out in my mind from that study was a operating or emergency room nurse who was on a camping trip in the wilderness with other doctors and nurses, luckily, because she had cardiac arrest, and they were able to do mouth-to-mouth and chest compressions. It actually took them an hour in a very small boat to get down this river till they could get a cell phone signal to call a helicopter or an ambulance. So they could rotate through the other people while they were working on her. So they kept her going for over an hour. And in the boat, in this time where they're trying to keep her alive and get the cell phone signal, she had the experience of a kind of light approaching her, like many people talk about. And something in her said, no, because she knew if she made contact with this light, that she would then go. That would be the end of her life, because she knew it this time around. The light came a second time, and this time she realized that light was her father who had passed. And he was making contact with her, and he began to communicate to her. And he said the same thing: it's not your time, you're going to survive. And she described him doing something that reanimated her, that got her heart going again. So he intervened, and I had heard 2 stories out of the 20 of an intervention from a loved one in spirit that helped them survive. That's a fascinating area to explore, I think.
Yes. So the take-homes from this study at this point, because I understand that you may be continuing with this study, but what's your leading edge in terms of curiosity and interest now? Like, what have you learned, and what are you now most curious about?
2 things that stand out in my mind at present is how many people that have had trauma or been put in coma or had coma or had it induced have NDEs. How many people are out there that have them, that are unprocessed, that received messages about why it was important to come back and what they were to accomplish when they returned, and don't remember? Because we get amnesia. We have to deal with our mental mind. We have to deal with our daily life. We have to deal with the trauma that put us in that state in the first place. And those significant memories are lost. So I think there's great potential, not to say everyone that had a trauma had an NDE, but there are many that don't know they had an NDE, that are unprocessed, and that's contributing either to physical illness or emotional imbalance, because there's something big sitting there that's so unprocessed, right? That's one. The other is some people experience healings during their NDE. Look at Eben Alexander and Nita Morjani. They died in hospital and came back with no illness. So how is that possible? I think it's an area of research that would be quite fascinating if we can achieve that state of expanded consciousness, free of the body and mind, in spirit. How much potential is there for healing in a way that we don't really even understand?
Profound. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Paul, I know you have an exercise that you're going to offer to our viewers. Would this be a good time to do that?
Sure, I'd be glad to do it. And just let me say that in my book, Essential Healing, are many practices that you can do for yourself to help achieve an expanded state and to do some of these journeys, right?
Yeah.
And make your own contact with your own soul self and your own guide. Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to take a few minutes just to give a kind of a taste or a preview of some of what's possible with this approach, with essential healing. I call it the journey home. So if you are in a place where it's safe to do so, you can just allow your eyes to close. And then you want to bring your attention to your breath. And you want to take some longer, slower, and deeper, letting go breaths. Beginning a process of relaxing both your mind and your body. And then take a few moments to begin to observe your thoughts. There's much more to you than your mental mind. So take some time to observe it and notice what it is that you hear your mind saying to you. Maybe it's quiet. Maybe it has a concern. Or perhaps it's assisting you. Just notice which it is. And then bring your attention, consciousness and awareness, to the center of your chest, your heart center. For this is the doorway to your inner world. And breathe and feel into this heart, inviting it to open. You don't have to let me or anyone else in there right now. This is for you. Open it as wide as possible and dive in toward the very core of your being. Dive through those protections. Dive into and even through all of the different emotions that are stored here. And there are many. But don't stop. Keep going. Almost like an arrow piercing to the core of your being, deeper and deeper within. Past all of the roles that you have played, all the different aspects of your psyche and ego, deeper and deeper within. Past that younger you, the little one, deeper and deeper within. To the very core of your being, to that place where perhaps some time ago, that authentic you was put away for safekeeping. Go towards it now and allow yourself to see or to feel or to experience that authentic you, that core self, that soul essence that is you. Notice how it feels to be in its presence. Perhaps it has a message for you, something that it wants to show you or tell you. And in your own way, you want to invite this core self, this true you, your soul essence, you want to invite it forward to begin to emerge, to break through those crusty layers that have confined it or diminished it in some way. Breathe into it and bring it forward to fill you, to fill your body, to fill your home, to fill your life, to be your compass in your daily life. And live your life from this place. feeling your feet on the floor, the chair beneath you, feeling into your body again, as this emerging of your core self continues, as your soul essence reawakens and emerges. Grounding and connecting, you let your eyes open all the way back. That's right. Naturally and easily. All the way. That's one of the journeys I love to take someone on, whether it's in my office or in the book or in a workshop. Yeah.
I just went right with you. Thank you.
Beautiful. Oh, beautiful. I love that. I just love that so much.
Paul, how, if I may, this is kind of a bit of a turn here out, at least for me, and I imagine some of the listeners here in this deep inner space, back into this interview space. How has your knowing from your work, from your constantly taking your clients to these, I don't know, I don't have the term for it, but like these other realms of consciousness, beingness.
Yeah.
How has your constantly visiting this, either personally or in your work, how has it changed you? Like when you live in terms of your day-to-day life, so many of us can say, yeah, I know that's out there and I've touched it. But we know this as we're trying to live the most meaningful, loving, kind life we can, as conscious as we can. And especially at this time in our world, it's so important. How's your work, your experiences changed you? And how do you live from that place in your day-to-day life?
Yeah. I think the real key is that it isn't out there. It's in here, right? That unconditional love I experienced out of body, I carry in here. The consciousness of having a soul or something more to me than my mental mind is in here. And yes, it makes me less judgmental. I have an ego and it has opinions about things, but I don't always have to believe it anymore. And so it made me less judgmental, more loving, right? Not perfect. Still don't like getting cut off in traffic or things like that, right? But and I think the other biggest thing is that, especially in this work, facilitating sessions like this, is I know, I trust, I believe, I know that you have it inside you too. And when I stand facing you and when I work with you, whether it's individual or group, I know that's there. It's not something I'm putting in you or doing to you. I have tools. I have a lot of skills that can help you reconnect with that. But what a different respect from human to human, from soul to soul, to know that that's there and I can help bring it forward. I can help you make contact with that and bring that forward. For me, that's the ultimate form of respect and trust.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and I want to say we are closing up here a few more moments, but I have worked with you, Paul, and I just want the listeners to know that everything you've shared with us, in my own way, I experienced in our 3 hours of regression work, and received a great deal of healing. So I say thank you to you and honor you and your work, and thank you for sharing it with our viewers today. But I want to give you an opportunity to tell us, do you have any upcoming programs that the viewers might be interested in? Also, tell us where we can get your book.
Books available in all bookstores and all online booksellers. It's in Spanish now also, so it's in Latin America and Spain. Yay! And yeah, my website, paularan.com, all the workshops, all the work I do, individual sessions are all explained there and available to be booked there.
Good. And just to be clear, Paul's book is entitled Essential Healing. Okay, I leave it to you for any final last thoughts, Paul.
Thank you for having me. And I think last words would be, know who you are and be that. Everyone else is taken.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our listeners today for joining us in this beautiful, enlightening interview with you, Paul Aran. So thank you all. Have a good day.